Well, hey there, everybody. It's time for another Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. This one is half hotel room edition. As you can see, I'm in a hotel down here driving the new Ford Maverick and the Bronco Sport, but Travis is at home because he has not yet left to drive the new GR Corolla and other GRs, right?
Yes, there's some cool stuff coming.
It's a great Toyota event, you might say.
I hope so.
Why is it that they don't have Tony the Tiger as their sponsor, spokesperson, spokes animal?
I think that one's pretty obvious. I'm not sure that's really what they're trying to lean into. People have opinions on TRD as well, and I think that's again not what Toyota was leaning towards.
Well, I mean, that
I
would be
think
more
it's
of a Roto-Rooter tie-up. I'm thinking,
mm-hmm,
I'm thinking
mm-hmm.
Tony the Tiger and cereal. You got to get those customers in young, right? So
I,
that I
I
think that
I
would be
understand
better.
that. Yeah, and name brand
Yeah,
affiliation, right? I get it. I get
yeah,
it.
win-win. That's what I'm thinking.
It's
Uh,
impressive that you're not working for that marketing team, but I digress.
they did not like any of my other ideas. I am here driving the Ford Maverick, and
Hmm.
I sent you this TikTok video that I thought was absolutely hilarious, and I cannot think of a Ford Maverick without calling it a Maverick,
Hmm.
and the trim being the Tremor rather than the Tremor.
Hmm.
And maybe if you are lucky, we will remember to put a link in the comment section of the YouTube video, so you should check that guy out.
It's been that impactful in your life.
It has been. It has been. He hit a chord somehow
Hmm.
with the TikToks. This guy on TikTok apparently works for a Ford dealer and was bored and in his spare time just started creating the craziest, silliest promotional sort of videos for random Ford products. Some of
Someone's
them
got to
better
do
than
it.
others, but the Maverick and the Bronco Sport, that was hit just the right spot.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide on the Auto Buyer's Guide.
So Travis, that jingle, apparently in the comment section, everybody seems to like it.
Yes, 100% satisfaction rate. Same for the outro as well. Nobody has any feelings against it. It's just me. It's just me.
I no, I'm surprised here because previous to our asking questions about it, there were only negative comments in the comment
Yeah.
section. Then all of a sudden we said, "Hey, what's the deal? Sound off in the comment section. Let us know if you have a better idea for replacing it." Then all of a sudden, with the light on, the roaches scurried, and all that we had left were people that liked our cheesy jingle.
It's one of those things that reviews are only going to be something people hate or something people love, and people are more likely to say, "Hey, I hated this," than "Hey, I love this." So you had to ask, and there we go. We got some more data points.
But we are open to changes. So, as
Hmm.
always, comment in the comment section below. Better yet, 5-star review us on your favorite podcast platform. Send questions, comments, voice memos, videos, I guess, if you want to. You can send those to hey@autobuyersguide.com.
Hmm.
You can also insert them in comments, social media. You can attempt to direct message us on the Facebooks, but do we ever actually read those?
We do, we do,
Some,
and don't-
oh,
and don't forget to find us on YouTube as well.
That's true. There may be a department for that coming soon on the comment
It's so
reading.
so far it's been me. I've been part of that department. So
And speaking of comments, you have one
we
or
do,
questions.
and this one, Alex, it's kind of a big one, and there's a lot of questions around it. So I'm just going to read it as is. This is from our friend David. It says, just a few hours ago, 25% tariffs were announced on all imported cars to take effect April 3rd, in addition to the pre-existing tariffs. I believe that was April 2nd, but either way, tariffs are coming. A lot of luxury brands are going to be bitten hard by them. However, a good deal of cheaper vehicles include the Chevy Trax, Kia K4, and Mazda 3, likely to get hit hard as well. Does this spell the end of the cheap car vehicle in North America, as they're usually low margin anyway? Or will manufacturers scramble to build massive inventories and then shift as much as possible, or just sit tight, bite the bullet, and eat a 25% tariff for 4 years and hope for the best? And I will say this came in before this, a few days ago, before we're recording this. So an opportunity for maybe a little bit of increase in inventory, but obviously there's only so much you can turn up an assembly line and still produce the vehicle the way you wanted to.
Right. And we have to preface this with a few caveats, I guess. We're going to, for the purposes of this podcast, assume that the tariffs will actually happen,
Yes.
and that they will happen as they have been mentioned so far.
Mm-hmm.
Big ifs, because let's just say this has been a moving target, right? There's been just so much action on this. Let's do it. Let's undo it. Oh, maybe if they make a concession, we'll change our minds. No one knows what's going to happen on the 2nd, least of all us. But we can talk about the effects if they do happen. And that is, as that has been explained so far, 25% import tariff on vehicles built outside the United States. Now, assembly in the United States from all foreign components would seemingly be less affected by this, except that there's also a tariff on imported car parts and components. So assembly in the United States would exempt the vehicle from some tariffs, but not from all the impact of tariffs, because even a 100% assembled vehicle in the United States has parts from outside the United States, and that's what's going to make this really tricky, how those components are valued. For instance, if you consider something like a Tesla, which is one of the most American-built vehicles in the United States right now, or a Rivian, both of those built in the United States, their batteries are assembled in the United States, but importantly, a lot of those critical components that are inside those modules, those don't come from the US.
Yeah, we're looking at some pretty wide sweeping effects. And like you said, it's unclear. We're assuming it's happening because we have to go off something. Assuming it happens, it's going to be a wild swing. And first and foremost, as much as we know that car companies are going to be hit with this, lot of feelings going out for auto manufacturer employees, because this is going to hit them hard as well. There's a lot going on. The pieces, the construction, the assembly, but it's going to raise it's going to raise prices. This is not going to make anything less expensive for anyone on any vehicle, I can't imagine, because every vehicle has something from somewhere else, and at least that component's going to get more expensive. So the question was, are manufacturers going to bite a bullet? And I can't see them just go ahead and sacrificing margin. They exist to make money, and they're not going to just go ahead and accept that. So that increase is likely to make its way to the consumer.
Right. If we look at this picture, generally speaking, the gross margin on the most profitable vehicles sold in North America tend to run around 25%. The dealer margin, of course, accepted, but we're talking about the company that's responsible for importing the vehicle. That would generally be Mercedes. They generally have the highest margins. That's not quite 25%. So Mercedes could absorb that, yes, but then they would go from making money to losing money. And why would they do that?
Right.
That's the most rational answer here. And a company like Honda or Toyota has decent margins, Honda less so. The more mainstream the company, the lower those margins generally tend to get. Toyota's margins are buoyed by Lexus, but if we're talking about a RAV4, etc., margins tend to be around 10 to 15% perhaps on those kinds of vehicles. There's no real way they can absorb a 25% tariff. But we have to get into the minutia of how exactly these tariffs are going to work. If you're buying a car for $10,000, and we're just going to use that number because it's nice and round.
Yep.
If you're buying a car for $10,000, a 25% tariff does not mean that car is suddenly going to become $2,500 more expensive, because the tariff is being put on the imported value of the vehicle. So Toyota imports the vehicle from Japan to North America. Maybe that imported value is $5,000. Maybe it's $7,500. We don't know the exact details because a lot of this is proprietary information. It's not publicly available what the manufacturing arm of Toyota sells to the North American division of Toyota the vehicle for. Like, we just don't know that because there are lots of other costs that are wrapped up in this. So exactly how these tariffs are implemented and exactly where that line is for each vehicle is going to be difficult to determine, which is also why it's tricky for something like a Tesla or a Rivian that are built in the United States, but there is some non-native content in these vehicles. Is it a tariff that's only $50? That would be great. Is it more? Is it less? We just don't know. The other problem, though, is the knock-on effects that this causes. because if you're selling a vehicle like, for instance, a Rivian or a Tesla, and there are commodity parts on board that are built in the United States, and you're one of the few companies that uses these commodity parts. For example, just off the cuff, tires, wheels, hinges, screws, etc. Whatever components we're talking about, big, small, all the way down to more advanced components like Bosch systems or anti-lock brake controllers, whatever. If you have a supplier that's primarily North American, US centric actually, because we can't even say North American anymore.
Yeah.
If your supplier is in the United States, but your competitor suppliers are outside the United States, and it is truly a commodity part, and then you can change to another part, you're going to see a drastic price increase in those parts because their availability will be a problem. So now all of a sudden, can you get the part? Your supplier maybe is going to start diverting some of the production to other vehicles. It's a whole mess. And then things get even more complicated for a lot of vehicles by the big three that are built by the big three, especially Stellantis, because Stellantis has long had a huge presence in Canada, something that prior to today was never controversial. And because of the close integration of the Canadian manufacturing facilities and the domestic manufacturing facilities immediately across the border, right around Windsor, right around Detroit, it's not uncommon for partially completed components, vehicles, subsystems, etc., to cross the U.S. border multiple times before the car is done. So how and when do you tariff this thing? And those are rules that probably will have to get drawn after this goes into final effect.
Yeah, like I said, we're looking at some form of pure chaos, and unfortunately, the largest impact is going to be, again, on manufacturers and their employees, and then consumers. Nothing is going to get less expensive, and then we're looking at the potential for the dealers to be affected. And they would, as we have seen, take advantage of opportunities to make a little bit more money. So if all of the competition gets more expensive, then they're probably less likely to go ahead and lower prices on some of their models, because why would they? And we might see that happening in some of the manufacturers of these components, right? Like you said, if it's built in the US and suddenly they are able to fulfill production for a larger variety of manufacturers, why wouldn't they go ahead and increase their prices? Because now to stay competitive, they can. So
exactly,
this is going to be a wild ride, and all of this happens for an undetermined amount of time, right? Again, like we've seen with these tariffs, not trying to get political, just looking at things as they are. Some have lasted for seconds, some have been announced and never existed, and some are set and off we go. And the rules are, it's a episode of Who Line It Anyway, right? The rules are made up and the points don't matter. But
indeed,
if manufacturers start adjusting to these changes, then everything gets lifted. Yeah, this is going to be a tough time, but it has affected sales so far. You were telling me that we've seen an increase in sales here in March. I imagine right towards the end of March, we saw a pretty decent little spike, but not for everyone.
Correct. Yeah, it appears that sales in the United States, new car sales in March, are up about 20% seasonally adjusted over normal. So that's a really big increase, and it appears to be largely concern over tariffs. Some of this could be availability of future models. I would be willing to bet that if the 25% tariff does stand and continues for any appreciable length of time, we will very rapidly see a whole slew of models, bottom to top, just being discontinued in North America. So that would result in less customer choice. A Mazda Miata, for instance, has almost no American parts content, and it's a very affordable vehicle. So where does that make sense in this picture? And Mazda is one of those car companies that's going to be supremely affected by this because they make almost nothing in the United States. And the only model they make here is they're built in the cooperative factory with Toyota in the southern states, in the United States. Even those models will probably see a dramatic price increase because a lot of the core components, engine, transmission, etc., are coming from Japan. But the bulk of Mazda's lineup, almost everything they sell, is made in Japan. Everything that Volvo sells except one model is made outside the United States. Most of it in Belgium, a lot in Sweden, and yes, even in China. But The problem there, in a way, this comparison is that Volvo is probably more able to handle a 25% tariff. The customer that really, really wants an EX90 or an XC90, they can probably swallow a $10,000 price increase. Maybe Volvo says, yeah, we'll eat some of the tariff, we'll pass a lot
Yeah.
of it along. We're talking about a higher margin product, so you can hide some of that in a lower margin window for a while. They could
Hmm.
probably remove a few models from the lineup, say, we're just not going to have some of these base trims anymore, streamline things in other ways. You'll probably see, in a way, the wealthy be less affected by this versus going to go buy a Chevy Trax, which is one of the most affordable and I think one of the best cheap cars in the United States, not made in the US. And
Hmm.
up and down the line, actually, inexpensive vehicles tend not to be built here for some very practical reasons. It's not, as many people assume, strictly labor costs, because yes, labor costs are high in the US, but labor costs directly do not account for a huge portion of the cost of manufacture of some of these vehicles. We're talking about synergies with other markets. In the US, we don't buy very many small, affordable cars, which is kind of a problem. That's why you can't really make them here, because where
Yeah.
else are you going to sell them and send them around? They tend to be made in South America or in Central America, or they tend to be made in other world markets, because those are also going to other places. That's why South Korea is where the discount Chevys are made, because they're selling a lot of those same Chevys in Indonesia and the Philippines and everything else around there. It doesn't make sense to ship them all the way from the US there. It also doesn't necessarily make sense to build a factory just in the US to make a Chevy Trax, because they aren't selling very many. Ditto something like the Nissan Sentra, Nissan Versa, etc. Up and down the lineup, when we're talking about affordable vehicles, there are good reasons why they are not always made in the US. I would say some of the exceptions to that rule tend to be more North American focused vehicles, and that's why they logically are built in the US, like the RAV4, built in the US because that makes a lot of sense. They sell a lot of them here, and we're one of the largest markets for RAV4. Ditto a lot of Honda's lineup. As we've talked about before, Honda, depending on how you want to look at it, is kind of a North American company that's headquartered in Japan. We are their largest market by far. When you take a look at their numbers, when you take a look at Asia, keep in mind that Honda operates as a joint venture in China, so you can only really count half of that sales volume. And the models they do sell in China are not designed and engineered by Honda, generally speaking. They're based on models from their Chinese joint venture partner for the most part. So worldwide, holistically, the things they sell tend to be actually quite North American focused, which is why Honda's actually sitting kind of pretty in this as far as the quote unquote import brands, because 64% of their vehicles sold in the United States are finally assembled in the United States. Really, it's just their newer hybrid models and a few other things that are still coming from Japan, some the Acura models, etc. But Honda's very proud to say that they're actually changing, and have been for some time, even before tariffs, dramatically upping the amount of models that are built in the United States.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to touch on. And one of the things that this is a callback to another episode, we talked about the federal tax credit for electric vehicles, which so far still exists, which is an interesting wrinkle in all of this. But I had said that if we as a country just eliminate that all of a sudden, we look at huge investment that manufacturers have made based on these standards, planning in advance, and running entire facilities from the ground up to meet that standard. But they had an idea what to expect, and then that gets pulled out, which again, it hasn't yet, but we're still waiting. The thing with these
Yeah.
tariffs is that there's basically no warning, no announcement, and so many of these vehicle partnerships happen between North American partners. You mentioned Canada and Mexico, who have always been, some of our best trade partners, because they're the ones we share borders with. There's a lot of things that cross that border. And when it comes to cars, that's where a lot of vehicles are made or parts come from. You mentioned the Trax, that's not built here in the United States. So it's not just those lower cost models that are going to be affected. You mentioned that other trims are probably going to be deleted, and the first trims to get deleted are the least expensive ones. So I'm looking at
Mm-hmm.
a potential huge shift in the car market. We already hear in our comment section, on every video we post, on every conversation we have, people saying cars are too expensive. Now we're going to be likely looking at losing some of our least expensive models, and then the least expensive trims of other models. And that's going to put everyone in a pretty tough spot.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. So just so to frame this for everybody out there, we should probably discuss the general order of who's going to be affected most by this tariff. So if I pull up here, share of U.S. vehicles assembled in the United States. Again, this is not talking about parts content because that will vary greatly here. But
No.
Rivian and Tesla are at 100%. Ford is next at just 78%. So that's a pretty big delta.
That's a
Things
big
then
drop
jump
off.
down to Honda. Honda's the fourth most American brand in North America. Again, remember, their kind of quirkiness there.
Yep.
Then it's Stellantis, the Chrysler group of companies, Subaru, Nissan. Then we get to General Motors with only about half of their lineup made in the United States. Toyota at 48%, BMW at 48%, Mercedes at 43%. And it's worth noting, BMW has pushed back hard on some of these tariffs and the drama around this, because this list kind of is a little bit difficult to figure out here in this way, because BMW says it's about 50%, but remember that BMW tends to silo vehicle assembly places here and there. So their SUVs are almost entirely built in the United States, X3, X5, etc. Some of their most popular models, and X7. That means if you are buying an X5 in Germany, it was not built in Germany, it was built in South Carolina. And the BMWs cross in the ocean. Makes a lot of sense for BMW. Well, when you look at this and you think, well, BMW is not being a good trade partner because 48% of their volume is built in the United States, it should be whatever. Keep in mind that the balance of trade with BMW actually is pretty good if you want to look at it in a balance of trade thing, because BMW X5 sold in Canada, sold in Mexico, sold in Germany, sold wherever you might be buying an X5, they were built right here in the United States. And then next we have Hyundai Kia at 33%, Volkswagen at 20%, Mazda 19%, and Volvo down there at 13%. And I think that chart's old, because the only Volvo built in North America now is the EX90, now that S60 production has ended.
Yeah, and that's going to be one of those factories that kind of just got spun up. It's the EX90 and the Polestar 3s. So yeah, there's a lot happening. Stay tuned, everyone. We will get the news as it hits, but in for a bit of a wild ride.
We definitely are. And we probably ought to move on to the next topic, but we'll just sort of conclude by saying stay tuned, and we'll talk about it in the next episode, see how this all unfolds on the 2nd. But hopefully everybody is buckled in for a wild ride, and it's going to be a wild ride that will continue evolving over time. Mercedes and a number of other car companies have said that they've already tried to stockpile cars in North America and in ports here and there, et cetera, to try and evade these tariffs. So it may be something that drips and drips over months here, that we don't know the final impact until a year from now or something like that. But we will all keep you updated as we go.
The good news for us is that business has been sort of as usual, and we've driven a lot of cars. Unfortunately, I mean, we apologize to everyone. We missed a week, and that's just because we were not around, and we can't always do a hotel episode. So, last week
not when we're 4 time zones away.
Yes, well, and sometimes it's more, and sometimes it's less. But I'll tell you what. Last week, my highlight was I did go drive Polestar 3, the new rear-wheel drive configuration, and that was an interesting touch. We can dive into some of these later. What have you been driving the last couple weeks?
So I drove the Audi RS e-tron GT Performance, which I think is one of the longest names in North America right now, and I think it could only be made more epic by adding Avant to the end. If anybody Audi is listening, that would be fun. Then I drove the new Honda Passport. No passport required to actually go visit the Passport. And what else have we had? We have had a software update on our Volvo EX30, which includes phone as key. We'll talk about that in a bit, because I think that actually is pretty nifty that we should talk about, because there's a big difference between Volvo's phone as key functionality and the one that I think most people are familiar with out there. Then you were driving a Subaru Forester Hybrid, which we can't talk about quite yet, right?
Yep. And then when I got back, I had an Outback to go drive for the week, and 25 Outback. and I had a Kia K4 the other week as well. So
Ah,
little bit of this, a little bit of that.
yep, and I had an updated Nissan Rogue, which is interestingly the only small crossover in America that is gas powered and has hands-free driving.
Okay, yeah,
All
that's an
Nissan
interesting
decided
pairing.
to. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised. I don't know who out there is going to buy a 35 to $40,000 small SUV and then add a $3,200 option so that it can drive itself on the highway.
Yeah,
But
it's a 10-ish% increase.
hmm
That's not
but if you
nothing.
have been enamored by Blue Cruise and Super Cruise and you want some of that on your next small family hauler that's actually quite comfortable on a road trip, you know, Nissan's Pro Pilot Assist, I'm surprised they haven't pushed it a little harder into more models because it's better than Blue Cruise in my opinion, not quite as smooth as Super Cruise, but pretty good.
So real quick, if you had the ProPilot Assist 2.1, the last Nissan I had was ProPilot Assist 2.0. That was with the Aria. That one I believe was hands-on, but I have to admit I was really disappointed by that system. So that's quite an increase for a point 0.1.
Yeah, Pro Pilot Assist 2.0 kind of their naming convention is a little bit wacky, first off, because they've called all of their driver assistance tech ProPilot something here and there.
Mm-hmm.
The main difference, apparently, ProPilot Assist 2.0, I'm looking it up here, is hands off, eyes on, but it doesn't do uh, left lane change assist. It doesn't have some of the smoothing and other features that ProPilot Assist 2.1 has, and it offers more expanded roadway support. So that would be the question I would say was, did the car ever tell you that you could take your hands off the steering wheel? The screen should turn blue, and then it should have
Yeah,
this little icon of like hands off the wheel. Like,
and,
Jesus,
and
take
I
the wheel.
and I don't remember. What I do remember for sure was that we've talked about Super Cruise being one of the best notifications that you are
Hmm.
in X mode and it is doing X function. I was pleasantly surprised because the Nissan had a whole halo system in front of you, at least in the
Hmm.
Aria. So at night, super clear what was happening because the whole interior color basically changed based on what mode you're in. But again, I don't remember if it was hands free or not, but there was a lot of ping ponging between those lane lines.
Yeah.
It was incessant, and actually, I had passengers that thought they were getting a little car sick, so I had to turn it off.
Hmm. If you were on a divided highway, interstate highway or state highway, multi-lane divided, most likely should have been hands-free. Any other situation, not likely. So, like Super Cruise will now operate on an expanded set of more rural roads and rural highways, especially Texas's farm to market roads, which are very,
Mhm.
very, very long. The Pro Pilot system does not. So it kind of depends on
Th-
the area of the
This was
country you're in.
all Interstate 5, so
Yeah,
yeah,
should have been covered. So 2.1 was a lot smoother, but hey, it's the only game in town at the same time. So
yeah.
kind of interesting on that front. The e-tron was also a lot of fun. Want to guess how much it was?
With so many letters, often comes so many digits. I think I want to ballpark like 165.
Yeah, we have covered before that new cars are increasingly purchased by the wealthy,
Hmm.
and the average new car buyer demographic is wealthy, middle class, upper middle class, high income earning kind of thing, double income, suburban dwelling, etc. Like all those adjectives fit new car
Yep.
buyers by and large. This is the top of that pyramid,
Yeah.
right up there, right up the top of that USDA food pyramid.
Oh my
$190,190 is the one we spent most of our time in, and it did not have all
goodness.
the options. It's
So, and I'll admit, I haven't gone through the RS configurator recently, or the e-tron GT configurator, excuse me. I imagine the Porsche option can be more expensive. That's what they're known
yes.
for. Obviously, the Porsche relative, the Taycan. So I haven't been through there recently, but $191,000 is a lot of money, no matter how you slice it. What's the in trim levels, right? So what's the boost in pricing from the next lowest trim level?
Everything is pretty
Ballpark.
pricey because
Yeah.
it gained about $20,000 over last year's MSRP. So we're talking RS really starts in the 160s, if I recall correctly. It's about a $40,000, $30 to $40,000 jump, as I recall, from the S to the RS, something
Yeah.
along those lines. Very expensive vehicle, no matter how you slice it. It is the
Ours are
flagship
very expensive.
performance flagship of the lineup. The interesting though thing about it is truly a comfortable performance vehicle with some absolutely bonkers numbers. And I'm going to go look at my notes here just to be sure I'm saying this right. 0 to 60 in the one that we were driving happened in 2.24 seconds. It's rated by Audi at 2.4 seconds. You don't need launch control to do 2.4 seconds. Audi is absolutely correct. 2.4 seconds, just put your foot on the thing, go. Launch control adds another 94 horsepower, and that got us 0 to 60 in 2.24 seconds. What's even more bonkers about this, though, is that it will stop from 60 back to 0 in 92 feet. An EV that weighs over 5,000 pounds, well below 100 feet in stopping distance.
That makes me hurt just hearing that number.
If that's not crazy enough, in 220 feet, it can go from 0 to 60 back to 0 again. And it did that at 50% state of charge.
With two people in the car.
With two people in the car.
On an unprepped surface.
On a not quite perfect track surface. It was a track course.
Okay. Yeah.
But it was not the slickest surface because we weren't it's not a drag strip. It was just regular paved track.
That's astonishing.
It was astonishing. And that's what and I keep saying what makes it more crazy. What makes it more crazy is there was wheel slip. So if the surface had been perfect, could have been faster. What makes it even more crazy is that to get to 60, the 2-speed transmission actually shifts.
I don't believe you. No, I do, but that's unreal.
And if you want to get sub 2 seconds, you can get a Taycan with 1,000 horsepower.
Yeah, you pay a little bit more, I imagine, for that. But I was having a conversation the other day, and I said, I don't know how to put this, but the Ford Raptor R is a good deal. And I said, trust me, $115,000 starting price is nothing to shake at and go, oh no, it's fine. I said, but you are essentially buying a trophy truck with a factory warranty that is going to work. And at $115,000, you look at the premium over a standard F-150 that has a similar configuration, right? Maybe feature set, whatever you want to put. I said, I think it's a good deal. At $191,000, that is a harder argument to make. However, those numbers are also unreal. I don't think it's quite as good of a deal as that Raptor, but that's kind of cheap for that sort of performance.
Yeah, here's the tricky part, because folks that were there obviously kept bringing up Model S Plaid and Lucid Air. Definitely, I would say valid considerations. I don't know if they're true competitors because they're just not the same kind of thing. It's like saying I'm cross-shopping a Lexus ES and a Honda Accord. Yeah, you could cross-shop them, but are they the same thing? Kind of, sort of, because one's related to the Camry, etc. But then if you start saying, well, I'm also cross-shopping a BMW 5 Series, then you're like, whoa. Lexus, BMW, okay. But these two specific models? No, I don't know.
Right.
Two different things. And yes, one person definitely does shop like this. Don't get me wrong. Like, I have had the weirdest personal cross shops. Am I going to buy a truck, a car, an SUV, or whatever? And you end up buying one of the above, right? But that doesn't make them the same thing. Just because you're cross shopping them doesn't make them the same. And that's the tricky part with the RS e-tron is the truest competitor is the Taycan, because it's the same thing, right? With the Porsche logo on it. Also going to be more expensive. The next closest thing, I would argue, doesn't necessarily exist yet, which would be the Polestar, We also have the Lotus EVs. Those are obviously very close, maybe a little bit separate from the Polestars because of the mission of the brands. Lotus is trying to be lighter weight and a different kind of performance. But that's what's kind of weird about the e-tron and Taycan as well, is that they're blistering fast, but the ride is not punishing, which is the quirky part. So it has the corner carving and handling that you'd expect from a Porsche, and I'm going to use that as the phrase here because it doesn't really handle like an Audi. It handles and feels a little bit more like a Porsche because Audis have been generally known for a front-heavy weight bias and a different kind of driving dynamic than BMWs and Mercedes. And in that respect, this feels intrinsically more like the Porsche lineup. The Panamera has a near perfect weight balance. The Taycan, of course, is 50-50. Obviously, I'm not talking about 911 with the rear weight bias, but
Right.
It definitely has a different vibe going on in that respect. The hydraulic suspension is astonishingly fantastic. It has the ability to not only cushion the ride to make it feel like you're just sort of floating down the road regardless of what the road's doing, but unlike air suspensions that then give you a wallowy feeling in the corners as a result, this can act so fast and directly interact with each wheel that it not only tries to level the vehicle, it will actually try and lean the other direction in the corner to improve handling capability. And it does it, it does it in an absolute instant. So that counterbalance, just like a motorcycle, leaning in the corners, is truly odd, but odd in an intriguing and good way that is nothing like a Model S or a Lucid Air. Model S and Lucid Air, I think, are fantastic. Model S, the second generation, rides really nicely. It's comfortable, but it's not that same kind of sporty. It definitely wallows in the corners. You get a lot of roll, a lot of tip and dive. It's wicked fast. It's not exactly a one-trick pony, but it's maybe a two-trick pony. Whereas the e-tron feels like a German performance vehicle that just happens to be electric.
Yeah, just locked in.
Yeah, on the other electrical side, so you might be intrigued by this one. So they made some big changes to the battery. It now charges at 320 kilowatts peak, and the battery pack will actually charge now below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So previously, and like most EVs, the battery pack had to be heated up to 95 degrees Fahrenheit to get the rapid charge rate. This one can do 320 kilowatts at, I believe they said 59 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's going to improve your everyday use of it. So you're not going to run into a scenario where my car won't charge very quickly at all. I mean, those are big steps. Again, big price tag, but
big price tag.
But that's honestly just for the suspension. That it sounds expensive, and I think that's going to be a big part of the reason why. Because you do everything so well.
It's a fantastically expensive option.
Yeah,
and then ours also had on it a carbon package option, which got carbon bits here and there, and carbon brakes and whatnot. So, many thousands of dollars of options.
Another car is worth an options for sure.
Here's the question for you: since this is a wish list car, none of us are ever going to make enough money, even if we sold a kidney to get an e-tron.
You can live in a car, you can't drive a house.
But in 5 or 6 years' time, would you get a used RS e-tron, or would you get a Taycan? I think the e-tron's prettier.
Full disclosure, I have an open tab on my computer for Porsche Taycan Cross Turismos, of the used variety. So between a standard Taycan and the e-tron, I would go with the e-tron. But Taycan Cross Turismo, that's probably where I would plant my flag.
No Sport Turismo, you'd go Cross Turismo?
I would do Cross Turismo. Not that Sport Turismo is not incredible, but I would be looking for a little bit more everyday ability. And I don't think I get a whole lot more out of the Sport. Obviously, the other thing is that the different trims and powertrains available, there's a lower performance option on the Cross Turismo, and I believe right now the Sport Turismo is GTS only. So price tag is a factor there.
Now, in a world where I could wave my magic Sharpie marker, and we're not talking about hurricanes here, and I could just go Avant, would you would you then e-tron Avant over hypothetical, since it doesn't exist? Would you
Right.
e-tron Avant over
I
Cross
gotta be
Turismo?
careful because I've got an Outback in my driveway right now, and I had to make sure I didn't say wagon too many times while filming on that one.
Hey, it's a wagon. Sorry,
Yes, it is
Subaru
for now.
owners.
For
It
now,
is a
stay tuned.
wagon.
I have
Yes.
opinions. I would want to see that Audi, but assuming it comes out well, I would likely go that direction. It's just more muscular, and I think it fills out the curves really well. I think the Porsche is beautiful, but yeah,
I don't
I like
like
to see
the front.
I'd like to see what Audi could do with it. The front doesn't bother me too terribly. I necessarily love the back actually. That's one of the reasons that I would want the I mean, I want the hatch because it's a wagon, but yeah, I mean, great problems to have. Great problems to have. And I don't think
Which
Audi is
does
going to go ahead and swap in an Avant version anytime soon,
no
unfortunately.
Audi. The people at Audi thought I had three eyeballs and said no, that's not happening. They said,
But
well, we'd
listen,
love.
we've
They
got some
said,
great ideas. So give us
yeah.
an
They said
e-tron Avant.
right. They said basically RS6, Avant, and I said,
Yes.
but that's not electric. If you're shopping in an e-tron, you're not shopping that thing.
Right.
Theoretically.
The other option list that we haven't gotten was a TRX Road Edition.
Mm-hmm.
We're also looking for, oh gosh, what else have we come up with? We've got some great ideas. We just need to call us in.
We are looking for a Passport Type S. Listening, Honda. So we should talk about the Passport.
Listen. I stand by you on a lot of things. That one I might let you just float out on your own. But
why? They have the engine. They've got MDX Type S. Jam the engine in a Passport. Who would not want 355 ponies in a Passport?
If you give me like a Baja style suspension, maybe we can talk about it.
Hey,
and then
at that point, the suspension has been improved over the last generation.
Yes, yeah. That's essentially the Raptor Honda. That's going to be the closest corollary. In which case, if we do it on a Passport, I want it on a Ridgeline.
But if you put that engine in your Honda, it could take you places where not only is a Passport required, a Visa might be needed.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's what you get for tuning in to the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. You find it here and here alone.
But at any rate, Passport. So I was surprised. It is a lot more comfortable than the last model. They really did change the suspension tuning on the Trail Sport. We were not allowed to drive the RTLs, sadly, but we did drive us some Trail Sports. The all-wheel drive system is not substantially changed, so it remains to be seen how it will reject overheating. If folks out there are wondering why the Honda and Acura all-wheel drive systems overheat, here's the long and short of it. Honda uniquely in iVTM4 and super handling all-wheel drive does not use a rear differential. It does not actually have a differential back there at all. It's a 100% geared drive unit is the best way to describe this. It's an angle gear setup, and a differential is what allows wheels to spin at different rates. So you have one input and two outputs basically, and the outputs don't need to match their rotational speed. That's not going on inside the Honda back end. In the Honda back end, it's straight geared through, and then on each side, you have a clutch pack that's actuated by an electronic actuator, sending power left and right. If the clutch packs are open, power goes nowhere, car's a front-wheel drive car. Clutch packs are closed, you have a locked differential in the back. So there are some benefits. Off-roading, obviously, you might want that locking functionality, but you may also want it to be able to send power to a single wheel here and there, because that helps torque vector you, yaw motion you around obstacles. So it cuts a really nice corner off-road. It's never going to have that binding feel that you'd get in a 4Runner or a Grand Cherokee, for instance. The problem is these clutch packs very rarely are open and closed. They're almost always somewhere between the two, and that means friction, heat, and possible overheating.
Yeah, which is what you don't want when you're out on the trail really utilizing it. Not something you're going to run into very often in your daily use, but again, when you need them, you don't want to be without them.
And Honda says that in this generation, they have improved the cooling of super handling all-wheel drive, but we don't know the exact impact of that. They've also increased the amount of torque that can be sent to a single rear wheel. I will say that Honda's marketing literature is a little, you've got to read between the lines. Honda says up to 70% of engine torque can be sent to a single rear wheel. True, that's not maximum engine torque, though,
Right.
because about 2,200, 2,100 pound-feet of torque is all that can go to a single rear wheel. That is, of course, engine torque multiplied by final drive ratio and first gear. That's going to get you that total torque line there. That's not 70% of that top line number, but it is still a pretty healthy amount when we're talking about system capabilities when off-roading. Importantly, though, it's not going to be as much as you could do in a Grand Cherokee or a 4Runner if you are, planning to go to Moab. This is not going to be your vehicle. But I was really impressed by just the general capability of the system on trails, and importantly, the feel of it. If you're just going further off the trail on a national park, or you're bogging through the mud here and there, you get caught in a winter storm and you're worried about snow or ice or whatever, it just has a really confident feel to it that I think is going to make the average, I hate to throw a Subaru under the bus, but let's be honest, it's going to make the average Subaru owner feel more confident than they would in a Subaru. And intrinsically, it's more capable than any Subaru all-wheel drive system as well, just mechanically, the design of the system. So I'm really intrigued to see how well this sells, also because you can get a whole bunch of weird accessories from the factory now in the Passport, including a skid plate that is going to give you 3 recovery hooks in the front. I don't know why we need 3 of them. 1 in the center, the 2 orange hooks on the sides. You can then also get rock sliders for the first time from the factory in a Honda. Honda's offered some accessories in the past, but now these are going to be installed in the factory. They've actually pulled more of these accessories into factory assembly here. You can also get white lettering on the outside if you want it to kind of look like a Bronco, white wheels if you want it to kind of look like a rally car, that kind of thing. So they're kind of
they're really leaning into it.
They're really leaning into a lot of these more customized options there. And 2 spare tires. This is one of the few entries in the segment that doesn't, from the factory, mind you, this is a dealer installed accessory, but from the factory was designed to accommodate 2 spare tires. One goes in the normal spare tire well, the other one kind of rides side saddle in the back, kind of like a 1980s Cherokee.
Yeah, now to be fair, you got to be nice to those Subarus, because right now I'm pretending to be a Subaru owner with the Outback out front and the Forester Hybrid I drove last week. Don't worry, stay tuned. We'll talk more about that next time. But let me tell you about the interesting suspension, transmission, differential situation that I ran into last week, and that was on the Polestar 3, which, as we have driven the all-wheel drive and the performance variants of that, have an incredibly, very good, right, distribution system when it comes to power output. And we lose pretty much all of that when it comes to this rear-wheel drive model. And I was really disappointed. And I love a rear-wheel drive bias, but there's not as big of a gap between driving performance when you look rear-wheel drive to all-wheel drive in this particular layout. And that's because we got rid of the trick differential. So the coolest thing is that torque vectoring rear axle that we had on that dual motor system. It was also the disconnect. Well, since we have a single motor, Polestar says we don't need a disconnect. They went ahead and said goodbye to that. And so it's still plenty fun, but it's not as big of a gap as you find in a lot of other layouts. And that was a bit disappointing.
Yeah, I have to admit I was disappointed in that too. And I kind of quizzed after you told me that, and I was sad. I quizzed one of their PR people, and they didn't really have any good excuses that held water with me. I think cost is the honest reason.
Yeah.
Because my sort of question was, is there some concern of overheating? And they're like, no, it's designed for spirited driving. Because part of the origin of my question there was, well, am I overthinking this? In a regular Polestar 3, or an all-wheel drive one, I should say, obviously the front motor is always connected, right? So on this highway, steady state driving, it's front-wheel drive. But the moment you start driving more aggressively, it becomes rear power biased. So I was thinking, well, maybe the cooling's not quite there, etc. But then it occurred to me that, we've driven it on a track, we've driven it off a track, spirited driving here and there and wherever. We've had it multiple times. Never had any issues with overheating, and it was always really sending a lot of power to the back. That just led me to think the only answer is that they're cheap.
Yeah, I mean, you got to cut costs somewhere. And when it comes to the packaging, I mean, obviously it's the same body, it's the same basic configurations, you can do the same feature sets for the same cost. So you got to save money somewhere. Dropping that first motor is a part of it. Dropping the rear axle, the very, very cool, very effective trick rear axle there is another way to do it. The last one, unfortunately, came in the suspension category, and that one was also a bit of a disappointment. Here's the thing. I'm on the record of saying I would probably go ahead and get that rear wheel drive layout and go ahead and spend some money on feature set. But I would admit that if you want all of it, you're not really missing out. The suspension is stiffer. You know, they moved from the Öhlins branded suspension, as well as having an air system built in there. The standard coil spring suspension leaves something to be desired. It's going to communicate more of the road into the cabin, not in a punishing way, but in ways that people may not enjoy. So that's one of those that, listen, you kind of get what you pay for, and that one you get a little bit less, but it's about $6,000 less, and that's no small chunk of change.
I'm kind of okay with the steel spring suspension because some people do prefer the feel over an air suspension, a little bit less wallowy, a little bit less soft,
More direct.
But I think that for a brand that is trying to be more of a Porsche alternative than a BMW or Audi alternative, I think it's disappointing that they didn't keep the torque vectoring axle in the back. I think that's a bummer. They should have kept that, deleted maybe a few other features, and just not had a price tag that low.
If you had to pick between that rear axle and the suspension, would you take upgraded suspension or upgraded rear axle?
I'd take the axle.
Assuming it's rear wheel drive.
Yeah, I'd take the rear axle. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it would still be effective, but it's not working as hard in that particular model as it might be in the all-wheel drive. At least I don't think so, but okay. All right.
Well, as always, everybody, be sure and sound off in the appropriate comment sections. Send your feedback to hey@autobuyersguide.com, especially those voice memos. We would love to hear your smiling faces if we can't see them. And stay tuned, because next week we may know whether or not new cars are going to be fantastically tariffed in the United States, and whether we will just see, I don't know, half the models just suddenly disappear from shelves. Hopefully,
fingers crossed we don't, but we'll all find out.
Fingers crossed. But hopefully you are all staying well, and in a world of uncertainty and uncertain times, just be kind. See everybody later.
Adios.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide. Here on the Auto Buyer's Guide, if discussions about donuts in the parking lot is what you came here looking for, well then my friend you're lost. Because our very human host Alex, we swear he's not a boss.